Imagine you experienced something yesterday and you're about to go on stage in front of 500 people. And you're like, should I share this story? But you haven't digested it. Have you embodied the learnings? So you don't want to use your audience as your unpaid therapist, right? You want them to feel empathy for you, not sympathy. So when you have something which has tangible learnings from that you've processed, are willing to share, and are open to sharing, it can be so powerful, and it does amazing things for your audience because one, they start to see you as human, but also on the other side of the coin, super, aka superhuman, because then you could be seen as the guide to help them solve their problem.
You're listening to Prospecting on Purpose, where we discuss all things prospecting, sales, business, and mindset. I'm your host, Sara Murray, a sales champion who's here to show you that you can be a shark in business and still lead with intentionality and authenticity. Tune in each week as we dive into methods to connect with clients, communicate with confidence, and close the deal. I'm joined today by Ravi Rajani, who at 8 years old was enrolled in the same dance class as his younger sister, and he had his very own Karate Kid experience. And that dance class is where he didn't even realize he was getting an education in stage presence and nonverbal communication that led to theater, which resulted in an education in public speaking and storytelling. And those Miyagi-esque lessons has led him to become his own business and his own brand. Ravi is a speaker, coach, and consultant who masters in the art of storytelling. He's also the host of the Influential Communicator podcast, which has so much great content on communication, presentation skills, and of course, storytelling. Today, we're going to discuss how we could ditch feature selling and start storytelling. So joining us all the way from the UK, it's the dance class kid, the Ravi Rajani.
You made me sound like I was in High School Musical. And you know what? I tell you what, if it was the same dance class as my sister, that would have been worse. Luckily, it was the same dance school, same dance class.
Got it. Okay.
Oh, I mean, you made the conflict in that part of the story was great. So good job. But if it was dance class, oosh, I would have quit after one lesson.
Okay, that's good clarification point. I apologize for the rumor spreading. I was trying to do like a
Stop
Chicago
spreading rumors.
Sorry.
Spreading damn rumors, Sarah.
I was trying to learn a lesson before this conversation on how to be a better storyteller. So I didn't want to introduce you with a regular bio, but I am so happy to have you on the show today. Welcome to Prospecting on Purpose.
Thank you, my friend. Genuinely, that was the best intro I've ever had on a show. Genuine.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm not even making that. I'm not even saying that because we're friends. I'm genuine.
Okay. I appreciate it. Well, we're going to kick right off with getting weird, and I have some fun icebreaker questions for you.
Okay, let's get weird.
So the first, because you're in the United Kingdom, I have to ask, who is your favorite famous British person?
My favorite famous British person is weird because I feel like I belong in the US with all my crushes. But who's my famous? Who's my famous? You know what? I'm gonna have to go with Bond. Let's go with Daniel Craig.
That's a good answer. Okay. So we got Daniel Craig in the house. And then switching gears, I follow you on LinkedIn, and I know that some Disney characters make cameos in your LinkedIn post. And I would like to know, who is your least favorite Disney prince or princess and why?
What are you going to say, villain? And I would have said Jafar because I hate Jafar and that parrot Iago, but that's another story.
It's a hard question.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to go with I'm going to take this question slightly differently. So in the original Aladdin, the cartoon, I loved Aladdin and the princess, right? I was like, oh my God, love you. Yes, that's going to be me in 20 years, right? Then I saw parts of the Disney movie recently with Will Smith as the genie, Yeah. And I saw Jasmine, or I suppose not Jasmine, but the actress who played Jasmine on the Graham Norton show here in the UK on TV. And she was so annoying. I was like, oh my God, I don't love Jasmine anymore. So yeah, I'm going to have to say Aladdin and Jasmine, but in the new version.
In the live action. Yeah. I know the live action, like some are awesome and some it's hard to like fix what ain't broken.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, hey, I'm a Disney kid. You know, I've got a daughter who's 5.5 months old, just over 5 months old now. So I can't wait for the stage where literally I'm going to be forcing her to watch old school Disney.
I love it. Well, and I was gonna try to figure out a way how to bridge the least favorite Disney character to be kind of our own villain.
Yeah.
But we'll go with the fact that she was annoying in an interview. I feel like
Can I tell you why? Can I tell you why? Because
yeah, please.
I must sound like so mean and like an a-hole to all the
No.
listeners, right? So, in a conversation where so it was her, Kevin Hart, Will Smith, and a few others. And when you could see somebody was having a fangirl or a fanboy moment, and she was overly laughing at Kevin Hart's jokes, like
Oh no.
that would be me, right? Because I'm a Kevin Hart fanboy, so fine. But it was over laughing, and it was like I was like, oh my god, why is this annoying me so much? So that's why. If you feel my pain, listeners, great. If not, then hey, I'm just a bad dude.
No, I don't think so at all. And I think that it's an interesting point because was it genuine laughing or fake laughing? Because I think that that's kind of ties into like sales presentations and where people can tell if you're genuine or not. And that's really like where we want to go to today.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I'm so excited to have you on the show, Ravi, is I really feel like you and I have very similar like mindsets and approaches to how we do business, how we view sales and like a sales role. I think it's a noble position. And then also, of course, how do we view our clients and the people that we work with? And from mindset, I think that authenticity is at the heart of what we both do and really humanizing that sales experience. So maybe let's start there. Can you tell us a little bit about your business and kind of what your angle is when it comes to how you approach sales?
Yeah, so to put it quite simply, I work with B2B tech companies largely across the United States, and I get them to really ditch feature selling and embody storytelling at every stage of the sales process so they can create a unique buying experience. Now, the outcomes are, yes, shortening the sales cycle, collapsing time in the sales cycle, driving win rates, increasing average order value. But the dope thing about it, like the hidden benefits, which I think are beneath the surface, is that salespeople start to get comfortable in their own skin. They gain more confidence to own their personality and show up as who they truly are versus who they think their prospects want them to be, which results in the fake Jasmine laughing on Graham Norton, right?
Yeah.
So really that's what I do. And I do that through my specific story selling framework, with story being an acronym. And you and I both know I'm a sucker for a good acronym.
And I love that because I think what's kind of neat is you talked about what your message is, what the business outcome was, but then what the actual individual's outcome was. Do you find that when people use storytelling as opposed to feature selling, they get more confident in their, like, what are some of the big hurdles that you see when you start training teams? And then how does that outcome evolve? Like, what's the biggest hurdles that people struggle with at the beginning before you really start working with them?
Yeah, good question. I think there's probably two sides to the same coin, but let's take the first side, which is the belief that a seller might have that they are not a good storyteller. So, for example, it's rewiring the story that they tell themselves. So, for example, I hear a lot of the time, I'm monotone. I'm not a good presenter. I'm not engaging. I'm not a natural born storyteller. I'm an introvert. Introverts aren't good storytellers, which I think is, I do not buy into that. I do not subscribe to that. But there's all of these different beliefs. So the goal is to really first shift someone's internal narrative. And I've got a specific process which I can walk you through in a second if you'd like.
Please, yeah.
But the other side to that coin really is people really understanding that storytelling isn't just customer success stories.
Mm.
So I think when people think storytelling, they go, oh yeah, like we've got case studies, use cases. But actually, I think there's a huge education piece around that there are about the idea rather that one can share different stories at different stages of the sales process to build trust, to create a connection, to convert, to handle objections, and to really create a unique buying experience. So I think on one side, there's the internal narrative that, the internal communication that needs to be shifted. And the other side is shifting minds of sellers that storytelling isn't this one time at band camp like American Pie.
Mm-hmm.
These are
Mm-hmm.
stories which should be inspiring prospects to take action.
Walk us through the specific process. What can people do to overcome some of those internal limiting beliefs?
Yeah, and like for all listeners really thinking, hey, do I have one of those negative or limiting beliefs? I think we all have them. I think it's all about just identifying them and taking a look at which one you want to do a deep inner work on. So I'll give an example. Let's say you, my friend, listening to this right now, have just identified a belief around storytelling or presenting that isn't serving you. And let's say it's, I'm not a natural born storyteller. So step
Mm-hmm.
one is identifying the belief that isn't serving you. Okay. So you're going to write that down. Okay. You can press pause on the show. You can write that down.
Mm-hmm.
Step number two is asking yourself the following question. Is this story I'm telling myself 100% true? Yes or no? Now, the goal with this is really getting you thinking about the stability of this belief, because what we want to do is create a crack in that belief system. So even if there's a chance that it's 1% false, that's good enough, right? That's good enough. We need to start thinking about the evidence in our mind, which goes against this story, this negative story that we're telling ourselves. Then we move to step number three. Okay. And step number three is, okay, cool. What is the new belief I would like to tell myself? What is the new story I would like to tell myself? So, for example, I'm grateful that if somebody believes that introverts aren't good storytellers, it could be, I'm grateful that I'm an introvert because introverts are incredible listeners and impactful storytellers. And for the record, I believe probably the best speakers in the world who often I look up to are either ambiverts or introverts, not always
Mm-hmm.
straight out
Mm-hmm.
extroverts, but another podcast for another day. Then the final step to this methodology is really going out there over the next 24 hours to engage in an action which supports this new positive story that you want to tell yourself. Why? Because what we want to do is gather enough positive evidence to crush the previous story. So every time we feel a lack of confidence or revert back to our prior status quo, we go, hold up. But I have evidence from yesterday where Sarah told me I'm an engaging presenter and it looks as though I've been storytelling for decades, right? So suddenly we need to build the confidence through these different actions, which will help us build competence and ultimately shift the narrative that we tell ourselves. And it's not an overnight thing, right? It takes time.
I used to do that frequently. Like, I'm bad at math. That was the thing I would say all the time. And it would stress me out because I'm a salesperson. So you have to do percentages, obviously. And I did workarounds. Like, I'm actually not bad at math. I
Yeah.
just found all my little cheats that worked for me. And I have a percentage calculator just saved on my bookmark. Like, it works. And then, and I think I really appreciate the fact that your third step is taking action, because I think that's the part where people get through steps 1 through 3. All right, I changed the thought in my head, but then they don't take action to actually go prove it. So I appreciate that framework. So once you have people kind of building that confidence on the internal dialogue, what happens next when you're walking someone through a workshop? Like, what's kind of the next big chunk when they're out in a sales capacity?
I really start looking at my story selling framework, right? Which is S stands for simplify story selling. T stands for tactically build a story bank. O stands for obtain delivery mastery. And R is ramp your MVP story, with Y being yield long-term success. So then we really get to the start line, right? And S is simplify the fundamentals of story selling. So that's really teaching people the why behind why storytelling is important, but also teaching people the differences between a case study, a mission statement, a use case, and a sales story, which I think is very different from any other type of story because it's a customer-centric narrative that is shaped in a very, very specific way. And we can go into my definition of it if you want. But really what underpins the entire learnings inside of the S part of this framework is my ACORN checklist. And somebody who's listening to this right now is probably like, what do you mean? Well, what is he talking about ACORNs for? Well, let's just rewind for a second, right? So a dude called Ralph Emerson once said that the creation of 1,000 forests is in one acorn.
Mm.
And I actually believe that the creation of 1,000 relationships is in one story, which is why I have the ACORN checklist. Now, inside of the ACORN checklist, inside of this acronym is attention grabbing, meaning we need to have a pattern interrupting hook inside of the story to break the spell of an individual being in their day-to-day life in autopilot, right?
Okay.
C stands for contain a relatable main character. Your story should contain a relatable human being who your audience can see themselves in, who your prospect can see themselves in, the pains, the desires, the transformation, all that good stuff, right? Then we've got O, which is your story should organically unfold within a simple sales story framework, right? We can't be like my friend Rich. I used to have a buddy called Rich. And Sarah, every time I used to speak to him, he'd be like, yo, Rav, I want to tell you the story. I'm like, cool, I'm a sucker for a good story. Hit me. There would be a beginning. There would be an end. There'd be a middle. We go back to the beginning. Then he enters the new story. And I'm like, dude, I just wasted 15 minutes of my life. And Sarah's nodding her head right now because she's like, yep, I've got a Rich in my life. So then we've got R, right, which is reveal the villain. So going back to Jafar, who's not a good fan. Oh, I suppose I'm not a fan of, and I'm sure he's not a
Yeah.
fan of me.
Nobody likes Jafar.
Nobody likes Joe. And that stupid
Yeah.
parrot Iago. I don't like that
Yeah.
parrot either. But those two are the villains in the story of Aladdin. So the question is, who is the Jafar in the eyes of your ideal client? Because we need to illuminate that. Because with no conflict, there's no tension. And without tension, how can your prospects pay attention to your story? And then we move to N, which is nurture trust inside of the ACORN framework, inside of this acronym, right? N stands for nurture trust, meaning I can't meet Sarah for the first time and say, hey, would you like to book a discovery call?
Right.
So really, we have to insert a call to action inside of the story, which creates an incredible buying experience, but meets your prospect with where they're at today versus where you want them to be inside of your sales process. So I'm going to pause there for breath because I know you probably got some thoughts, but hit me. What do you think?
Well, I want to date. Oh, I love that because I feel like it gives more of a recipe, and so it's something that's an actual framework to use what it is. Like it uses an
Yeah.
actual framework to like slot in what you want to achieve. So attention grabbing, I feel I understand what that means. I think everyone understands what attention grabbing means. I want to get into consistent main character, relatable main character. Could that be you, the salesperson? Could it be another customer who used your product or service and they're, not necessarily a case study, but hey, I want you to meet Jerry. He was the director of IT over at this company. Jerry, da 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 da. Like, can you talk a little bit about how to identify the main character and different types of characters that could belong in that story?
Yeah, let's take a look at a customer success story because that's probably one of the most well-renowned ones that people can grasp. So inside of a customer success story, the goal would be, who is somebody, another human being who has a similar DNA to the prospect that you're trying to connect with,
That's
right?
good.
So similar pains, similar desires, and a transformation which has been achieved that your prospect is hoping for. So I'll give you an example. I was selling in my early stage startup days, right? I was selling a specific payments product at this time. And I remember very clearly sharing an enterprise level customer success story with an SME client because my ego wanted me to look great and really big in front of this client. Well, guess what? That story created a disconnect. And you know what they said? They were like, I get it. You don't serve people like us. You don't serve SMEs. You don't serve us small clients. You go after the big boys. We're probably not a good fit. Now I'm paraphrasing, but I did lose that deal. So you need to ensure that the human being inside of the story, in their DNA and the company's DNA, are very well correlated is a wrong word, are very focused on also the prospect that you are trying to connect with. Why? Because think about it. You want your prospect to see themselves in the journey of that main character.
That was incredibly helpful to include an example because in my head, when you said find, similar DNA, I was thinking roles in the organization, right? There's
Oh,
usually a
yes.
lot of decision makers, especially in B2B and technology. There's like 40 different people that have to sign off sometimes. So if you're talking to an owner versus the guy who's going to operate the product, it's a much different conversation. So I appreciated that you used a business model example as opposed to a role, because it could be both.
Well, actually, this is a really good point, and I should have been clearer, but it is both. So, for example, I can't share a story about $1 billion client with somebody who's an early stage startup, because if I use percentages like we help them with a 1% uplift, great for $1 billion company, but for a startup who's not even achieved 500K in annual recurring revenue, they're like,
Get out of here.
or 100K rather, it's like, well, okay, we want more than that. So
Yeah.
yes, there's a company piece, but on the human piece, right, which I should have dug deeper into, there is, for example, the role,
Mm-hmm.
their pains,
Mm-hmm.
their hidden pains, their desires. For example, if I inserted a main character of a story about Sarah Murray, who's the SVP of sales over at BNY Enterprises over in LA, that's different to Ravi Rajani, who's the CRO of XYZ Enterprises in London. The VP of finance, rather, right? So they're two different buyer personas, is what I'm getting at. So we want to make sure, yes, the role, etc., because somebody wants to know who is somebody like me who's gone from pain to glory. So there's the role and the business there.
Well, and that becomes part of your like tactical, arsenal of stories that you mentioned as part of the framework. I also want to ask you a question about, because I feel like you hit on it already. People have great stories, but they're not necessarily great storytellers. As I'm assuming part of your workshop is with this framework, crafting the actual art of storytelling too, and making sure, okay, we have a main character that's going to organically fold because we grabbed attention. We have someone who's relatable. We're taking them through a logical story. Now let's talk about the villain. How do you help your teams that you train find their villains?
Good question. So once we've got through the fundamentals of what story selling is, right? And that is S inside of the story selling framework. Inside of that, we've got the ACORN checklist. Then we would move to T, which is tactically create your story bank. So I've got roughly 5 stories that I teach sellers individually that they can craft. But what they need to do is craft all of those. I teach 90-second stories because I think people's patience, right, is shorter than ever. So inside of
Mm-hmm.
these 90-second stories, it's like, where do you reveal the villain? Where do you include the main character? So really, the framework is the following, right? We insert a hook, which is where your attention grabbing. Then we include the context of your story, which is like, I remember back in November 2020 when I first met Sarah Murray, who's the VP of sales over at Cisco where was it? It was that trade show in San Francisco, right? Context. Then we moved to conflict. So what was the conflict? Where was the villain? Who was the villain? Was it the regulatory climate? Was it another human being? What was it, right? What was the villain? Then we have the turning point, which is the aha moment inside of the story. And then we've got the transformation, where the main character goes from pain to glory. And then we pivot to prospect impact. Here's what that means for you, prospect. And then we end with a call to action. So we've got hook, story, prospect, impact, call to action. And that story is 4 elements: context, conflict, turning point, transformation.
All in 90 seconds.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Because I think that the hook too, I appreciate that you talk about ditch feature selling. I call it product vomit, but that's not the brand. I really want to say the V word all the time. So I appreciate ditch feature selling, because I think that's where people really get stuck. They meet a client, they don't ask any questions, and then they immediately just start talking about product. And this essentially eliminates that. So you get 90 seconds where you have a story, and then that relationship's much different, because it's like, oh, this person sees me, they're using my lingo, I want to learn more from Ravi. That's awesome. Okay, and then so we got this, the S in the story, we got the T, we got the tactical bank. Obtain evidence.
Obtain delivery mastery. Good. Close.
Oh, sorry.
I'm hitting you with so many
I know,
acronyms.
it's so juicy. I love
There's
it.
too
Okay.
many. There's too many.
Wait, say one more time. Obtain delivery mastery.
Obtain delivery mastery.
Okay,
Exactly.
got it.
So that's, what I then get people to do is they're not crafting 5 stories. They're crafting 1. So, for example, traditionally that begins with an elevator story, right? So
Mhm.
I'll give you an example of the 5 stories I teach so that it sets the stage for obtain delivery mastery. But you'll either be crafting an elevator story, to hook your prospects to ultimately land that meeting. Or on a demo, you may be trying to build trust and build a connection. So I teach reps how to craft a personal story. That's very impactful. Then we move to really building and accelerating trust. If you want to do that, then hey, nothing better than a customer success story. And then we've got story number 4, which is a story which reverses resistance, aka an objection handling story. And then we've got the final one, which is the conversion story. So in today's climate, instead of focusing on the return on investment, I get reps to think about the cost of inaction story. So they're crafting one of those. Now, once they've done that, using that hook, story, prospect, impact, call to action framework, and they're ensuring the ACORN checklist is infused into all of it, they move to obtaining delivery mastery. How do they do that? Well, think of a table read in Hollywood, right? You've got the story, you're reading it out loud, you're tweaking, you're ironing out all of the different kinks, and you begin testing it in low stakes scenarios. But more importantly, you engage in a disgusting amount of practice, meaning, is there intonation inside of your story? Is there emphasis? Is there a pause? What's the tone like, right? What's the volume, the pace like? And are you embedding it into a conversation without being icky?
Oh, that's so important. Okay. And I feel like I needed to rehearse a little bit more about my intro to you, my whole dance class mistake.
No,
But
that
I
was good.
appreciate that too. I appreciate that too. I'm practicing, right? Okay, so then R, talk about the R.
So once you've practiced it, you need to ramp your MVP story. So that's where you take it to market. So really, that's where you begin testing it live in low stakes scenarios. Here's why. Jimmy Kimmel had Kevin Hart on his show last year, and Kevin Hart said it takes him 12 to 18 months to perfect 1 hour's worth of comedy material. So for sales leaders trying to implement this for their teams, there's no 1 hour workshop and then boom, done. That's going to transform your team into elite sellers. It requires enablement to engage in real repetition with the teams. Repetition. It requires leaders and enablement to be really hands-on. So that's where you're ramping the MVP story and then listening to the call recordings. So, okay, John was on the call. And when he spoke of his elevator story, what did we think? We're dissecting the content, the structure, the delivery, etc. So it's really dissecting it and perfecting it. And then we move to why, which is yield long-term success. So that's ongoing training and crafting of more stories. So once you've got one nailed, then you move on to the next one. Because the biggest mistake I see is people don't get good at any storytelling because they're trying to craft too many.
And then it gets like part of this story over here joins part of the story over here, and the person can tell they're winging it and they're being run around like a rich. That's so helpful. I feel like everything that you're saying is super tactical too, which is really helpful. Like the why is so commonplace when you hear it laid out this way. So I just want to really thank you for some of these like really hands-on tools that you've already given us. I love the idea of practicing too. People can always tell when you're winging it. And I really like the idea of mastering one before you get to the next one. Do you find that it becomes a lot easier for your people that you train after they start doing it?
I feel like the biggest aha moment, which creates the ripple effect, is when somebody realizes they have a story worth sharing. Because often what happens is you get younger sales reps who'll say, I haven't been in the world of sales for that long. I haven't closed these big deals. Who am I to share a story or even my story with a prospect? One of the most transformational things I saw was last year, I was speaking at a sales kickoff for a company called Crunchbase. And at the end of the day, we had a story slam. So I had an Oscars trophy and different prizes ready for people. And what they had to do was they had to craft their personal story, their 90-second personal story. And I gave them their story arc. I gave them different ways to think about things they can put into that story. I gave them the template, and 3 people came up on stage. And it was the most fascinating thing where one of them, who was a couple of months into his role, people were screaming for him. They were going crazy because they didn't know these certain parts of his story. And he said, I didn't know that was important. Like it's just stuff that's just happened to me. But when he shared it, he built a connection with his team. And suddenly they were like, man, I never knew that about you. So that there can become the catalyst.
But to get people really understanding the value of it and incorporating it into part of their sales DNA.
Yeah.
I think that that's really powerful. You had a podcast episode about why sharing your story is not egotistical or narcissistic. And I think I see that a lot with people struggling to like toot their own horn or, share successes and wins. Can you talk a little bit about that mindset and give us some tools there on how to overcome that feeling of like being an egotistical person when you share your own story?
Look at you. How much research have you done? I love it. I love it. So,
My job.
I love it. It's so
But I
good.
like that episode a lot, so I want to make sure that other people can hear it because I don't have a problem with it because I'm a little, chatty Cathy. But I know that I have friends that do, I have colleagues that have had that issue. So I really want to make sure that we hear from you.
I wonder where that came from, chatty Cathy. Like there must have been a Cathy in the world who was
Poor Debbie Downer or Negative Nancy.
yeah, 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 yeah.
You're like smiling Sarah or like, I don't know.
Smiling Sarah. Or I've heard
You can
sassy
think of yours.
Sarah.
Oh, yeah. That's okay. So we can be sassy sometimes.
Anyway, back to the question. Back to the show. So, a guy called Yahya Bakar, I heard him say this once and it impacted me. It was, you have to look at your story and ask yourself the following question. Is this designed to give me significance or my audience significance? And hey, I'm not perfect. I'm work in progress just like you. So when I look at parts of why I'm sharing a story, that's the question I ask. Like, does it give my audience permission in some way? Will somebody go, oh my God, Ravi's being so open about that. And as a result, now have the permission to be me in this environment. If it does that, great. If it just makes me look cool and if it just makes me feel great and gives me that dopamine hit, then that's not a good look. It's not a good look. So I think that's something to really think about. The second thing is a lot of people will say, and this is more in the entrepreneurial space than individual sellers, but they'll say, I don't want to be the center of my story, even though my products and everything is built around my personal brand. Here's one thing I like to think about. Being the main character of your story isn't narcissistic or egotistical if you are simply allowing your audience to see themselves in your pains, challenges, transformation, and desires. But more importantly, if you're sharing something that you have tangible learnings from, it's so impactful, right? Because think about it, you don't want to be sharing something, in my opinion, where imagine you experienced something yesterday and you're about to go on stage in front of 500 people. And you're like, should I share this story? But you haven't digested it. Have you embodied the learnings? So you don't want to use your audience as your unpaid therapist, right? You want them to feel empathy for you, not sympathy. So when you have something which has tangible learnings from that you've processed, are willing to share, and are open to sharing, it can be so powerful and it does amazing things for your audience because one, they start to see you as human, but also on the other side of the coin, aka superhuman, because then you could be seen as the guide to help them solve their problem. And I went down a story just like Rich there, and I've waffled my way to oblivion, but hopefully you get what I'm saying.
No, I liked it. I think that some of my takeaways from that is, who is it serving? Is it designed to make the audience? Is it designed for the audience, or is it designed to make yourself look good? And then I really appreciate the point about digesting the learnings, because that's, I think, a great way to view failures too. Or, I'm going to do air quotes failures, because any type of failure is just trying something. And so what can you learn from that? And if you reframe failures, it makes everything else a lot easier. So I really appreciated that answer. Thank you for sharing. What else do you want to leave us with when it comes to storytelling? Like, you've given us so many good tools. Like, what else is we can't miss or we can't forget about?
One thing I would love to leave people with is think about a networking event. Imagine going to a networking event. And this is what used to happen to me, right? When I left corporate and went into the world of startups, I would go to an event. And somebody would come over and say, oh my God, Ravi Rajani. Okay, cool. So what do you guys do? Because it was on my badge, right? And I'd be like, we're doing this thing. Like it's kind of crazy because I can't really talk about it because we're in stealth mode right now. But it's like I'm doing this thing, and it's like AI for like hedge funds and stuff. Like it's crazy, but So what do you do? Guess what would happen? That person would be like, thank you for telling me a story about you where you don't know your product suite, you don't know your elevator story, you don't know who you are, whatever it might be, right? And they're like, yeah, let me go get a drink or whatever it might be. Now, that scenario plays itself out probably 1,000 times a day across the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I would say is figure out a way to nail that elevator story in less than 60 seconds. And hey, if you're interested in doing that, I've created this 5-page, maybe 5-6-page guide on exactly how to nail that using the story framework, the sales story framework that I've unlocked for everybody today. So if you'd like that, head on down to theravirajani.com/your elevator story. You can just grab a copy there. It's free. But that there would be the first thing to nail. Because I don't know about you, but if I don't nail that, there's no way I'm earning the opportunity to share any other stories. So the goal is to nail that bad boy right there.
Okay, so I'm going to go download the elevator pitch story too. Thank you. We'll link
Over
everything
it.
up in the show notes for this episode too. If somebody wants to hire you for a workshop, what's that process? How can they find you?
So I hang out a lot on LinkedIn. So add me on LinkedIn, hit me up with a DM. But I'm going to go against my own advice here, and I'm going to give you 2 call to actions just in case. But you can head on down to my website, www.theravirajani.com/contact, and you can submit a quick form. And hey, we can see if we are aligned and are a good fit.
Awesome. I appreciate your time so much, Ravi. You always energize me. I love people that leave me energized. Thank you so much for your time, and I can't wait to hear the feedback on the episode.
Me too, my friend. Honestly, one of the best shows I've been on in ages. Your research is impeccable. I love it.
Thank you. I'm using this as a vehicle for myself to learn too. So in service of the audience, I'm also building myself up too. I want to learn these skills, and I appreciate having the opportunity to have you on the show. So thanks so much for joining.
Appreciate it, my friend.
Thank you so much for listening to the Prospecting on Purpose podcast. If you loved what you heard today, subscribe to the podcast and please rate and leave a review. For more info on me, or if you'd like to work together, feel free to go to my website, saramurray.com. On social media, I'm usually hanging out at Sara Murray Sales. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.